Hello, I'm Sheldon Baker, editor-at-large for Innovision Health Media and your host for Healthy Bytes. My guest today is Dr. Dale Bredesen, an internationally recognized neurologist with expertise in the mechanisms of neurodegenerative diseases. He's a senior director of precision brain health at Pacific Neuroscience Institute and chief scientific officer at Apollo Health. Dr. Bredesen, welcome to Healthy Bytes.
Great to see you. Thanks very much, Sheldon.
So let's get into it. More than 6 million Americans live with Alzheimer's, and that disease is only going to grow. By 2050, that number is projected to reach 13 million. An additional 10 million people over the age of 65 will have dementia, while 22% of older adults live with some form of cognitive impairment. Would you say that Alzheimer's is now optional? And of course, many are skeptical about the claim. And so how do you address that?
Yeah, great point. And you mentioned over 65, but in fact, the group that's growing the fastest is the 40-somethings and the 50-somethings, where, we used to never see people that age getting Alzheimer's, and now it's a relatively common thing to see. So there are unfortunately some changes that are very concerning. And you're right. What we've been saying, what we've been concluding after reversing cognitive decline for the first time back in 2012 and publishing that in 2014, then 100 more cases in 2018, then publishing a successful trial in 2022, and then independent confirmation by Dr. Heather Sanderson in 2023 with her own trial that showed the same thing. We are seeing that, in fact, this can be prevented, and especially in the early stages, reversed. And therefore, what I'm telling everyone is, please do not wait. This is now optional. If you start 35 or 40, get evaluated, get on optimal prevention or earliest treatment. Do not wait until late stages. Then it truly does become, as crazy as it sounds to hear that, it really does become optional for so many of us.
And those that know you and those that know about you know that you're a pioneer in the field of neurodegenerative research and have said in your new book, The Ageless Brain, How to Sharpen and Protect Your Mind for a Lifetime, the misunderstandings of the disease have hindered efforts to treat it.
This is such a good point. And there's a whole book now that's just come out from Charles Piller, the science writer, about fraud in Alzheimer's research, and it is well documented in multiple laboratories. So this is a real concern, and there's no question there has been misunderstandings, there's been fraudulent research, there's been biased research associated with trying to push drugs that are not necessarily effective. Of course, there's big money in selling Alzheimer's drugs. And so even though they haven't really worked very well to date, there's been a lot of push by salespeople and things like that. So for all these reasons, there has been absolutely a problem. And the research has shown something quite different. The mainstream idea is that this is about amyloid in your brain. You get amyloid for some unknown reason, and then boom, it's going to give you Alzheimer's. But the research shows something quite different. What the research shows is that there are many different insults that your brain is exposed to over life. It can be herpes simplex. It can be P. gingivalis from your oral microbiome. It can be due to leaky gut with systemic inflammation. It can be due to air pollution. And of course, the recent California fires, great concern because they increase risk for dementia. It can be a COVID infection. There are all these different insults. And of course, one of the most common is to have metabolic syndrome from a standard American diet. So all of these things are responded to, and in your brain, the response that is associated with these things and is associated with inflammation and the innate immune system happens to be amyloid. So you do make this amyloid, which is a response. It's not the primary driver, it's the response. And it will sequester these various pathogens. It is an antimicrobial peptide, so it can kill many of these pathogens. So this is your brain responding to these insults. So when we prevent it and treat it, what we want to do then is to identify these things, and then we want to remove those as a problems and rebuild what has been lost. This is not just about sucking out the amyloid. And we know from the studies from the pharmaceutical companies, when you suck out the amyloid with an anti-amyloid antibody, you have all sorts of problems with brain bleeding and brain edema and all sorts of things like that. And you don't improve cognition. At the very best, you slow the decline a little bit.
And to reduce the global burden of dementia would require a major public health program. An extensive evolution and treatment for every individual would not be financially feasible. So how could it be achieved?
That's exactly right. The big issue currently is it does take some, for people who have significant symptoms, you're looking at, a lot of testing, you're looking at a lot of treatment, you're looking at a functional medicine approach, and then continued optimization and doctor visits and all these things. So it would not be feasible, just as you said, to take every single person and say, okay, we're going to do all these things for every person. And that's why I favor the idea of a public health approach, much as we had with vaccinations or things like that. So the public health approach is fairly straightforward. And I look forward to the day when there is a major public health effort to reduce the global burden of cognitive decline. So what you would do is you would start with just some basic public service announcements. Here's how to do the basics: your diet, exercise, sleep, stress, brain training, detox, some targeted supplements. Those are the basics. Everybody can do that relatively inexpensively. Then a few of those people will go on to have symptoms. We want to catch it as early as possible. You want to then treat those. Those people will take a little more testing and treatment. And then most of those people will not go any further. A couple of them will then have further problems. So as you can see, it's a pyramidal sort of approach where everyone does things that are fairly simple. The few that come through the cracks then have a little more, and then those that even go break through that will have further testing. With that idea, you could have a very efficient public health approach to reducing the global burden of dementia.
Well, easy for you to say, but there are many different theories about what causes neurodegeneration, from
Yes.
type 3 diabetes to mistold proteins to herpes, infections to oxidative stress. Is that all true? Is that what causes it?
That's a good point. So what we found is that there are 6 different groups, and you're right, the herpes is one of these things. There are different insults to which your brain responds with the sort of response that gives you the pathology that we call Alzheimer's disease. And so there are the 3 major ones, and those are energetics. If you reduce blood flow, oxygenation, mitochondrial function, any of those things, you are increasing your risk for Alzheimer's disease. Inflammation, just as you said, things like herpes and all these tick-borne illnesses, Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, other things like chlamydia, any of these things that cause chronic inflammation. And often we don't know that we have these until we check for them. So inflammation is the second one. And part of the inflammatory response in your brain is that amyloid that we associate with Alzheimer's disease. Interestingly, when you look in the brain has its own microbiome, which is a surprise. And that microbiome reflects your oral microbiome. So that's the second one, inflammation. And then the third one is toxicity. And it's 3 different groups of toxins. It's the inorganics, like air pollution and mercury. It's the organics, like glyphosate and toluene and benzene and anesthetic agents and things like that. And then it's the biotoxins, things like trichothecenes and ochratoxin A and things like that. So those are the 3 big ones. Then the 3 more modest ones, but also important for cognitive decline, are trophic support. And that's things like vitamin D, estradiol, androgens, things like that. These are all important as trophic support. Nerve growth factor, BDNF. And then neurotransmission, so things like acetylcholine, neurotransmitters. And then finally, stress. Chronic unremitting stress, not the stress that just comes and goes, but the chronic unremitting stress is actually associated with brain atrophy. So those are the 6 groups of things, and we can look at many different features within those to understand for each person why is there either risk or why is there actual driving cognitive decline. What are the things that are driving cognitive decline so that you can get in early? The good news is you don't get dementia for at least 20 years before this biochemistry starts. So you can look when there's asymptomatic phase, SCI phase, subjective cognitive impairment, MCI phase, mild cognitive impairment, all before that final dementia phase.
There is something that I've heard you say and others say that has never made sense in neurodegenerative disease research, and that is something called prions. Whose
Yes.
discovery has led to Nobel Prize and have now been identified in all of the major diseases from Alzheimer's to Parkinson's to ALS, that we are transmitting these diseases to each other.
Yes, such a good point. And of course, Dr. Stanley Prusiner was awarded the 1997 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for his discovery and characterization of prions. And these are tiny protein. These are literally infectious proteins. They're proteins as he called them, proteinaceous infectious agents. So the paradox here is all of the major neurodegenerative diseases have now turned out to have these. So the amyloid, the tau in Alzheimer's, these function as prions, which means they are proteins that can get more of themselves. The alpha-synuclein that's present in Lewy body disease and Parkinson's, these things will get more of each other. And yet the paradox here is there's no evidence that we are giving these to each other. There's a very, very few cases where they're showing from things like the old-fashioned way of giving human growth hormone from brains, you actually could get it. But the vast majority of us don't seem to be getting Alzheimer's because we got it from someone else. So how do you resolve that? What our work suggests is that you're actually generating these endogenously because they're not there to give you a disease. They are antimicrobial agents, all of these. So not only are they the prions, as originally pointed out, but they are anti-infectious agents that are sequestering things like viruses, sequestering things like mold species and various pathogenic bacteria and killing them. So that's why that resolves the paradox. We are generating these things. We're not giving them to each other necessarily.
So at the end of the day, what are some of the action steps we can take to fight against Alzheimer's and other diseases?
Yeah, great question. So the actionable things are, we break them down into 2 groups. They're the 7 basics, and then they're the 2 specifics. So the 7 basics are plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet, which again has been helpful again and again for people to become insulin sensitive and to become able to become metabolically flexible. So you want to be able to go back and forth between utilizing glucose and ketones. And then exercise, both aerobic and strength training. And then sleep. You want to have at least 7 hours of sleep at night with oxygenation above 94%, at least an hour and a half of REM, and at least 1 hour of deep sleep. And then you get rid of that chronic stress, as I mentioned earlier. Brain training and brain stimulation. Some people like to use red light and things like that. There's some good light sources out there for photobiomodulation. And then detox, some basic detox, and some targeted supplements. For the specifics, you want to look at infections that you may have, and you want to eradicate those, and then you want to look at toxin exposure. So all of these things are available now. That's the great news. The armamentarium for preventing and reversing cognitive decline is large and growing. And there are lots of excellent practitioners. We've trained over 2,000 practitioners from around the world and all through the United States. So there's a tremendous amount you can do. And I urge everyone, please start early, get on active prevention or earliest treatment, and together we can all reduce the global burden of dementia.
Dr. Bredesen, I always enjoy talking to you and hearing you speak. Your new book, The Ageless Brain, How to Sharpen and Protect Your Mind for a Lifetime, is now available via Amazon and Barnes & Noble, also on your website?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you joining me today on Healthy Bites, and hope to see you next time. Folks, thanks for tuning in and listening to Healthy Bites and my guest, Dr. Bredesen. Thank you.